Welcome back to Dragon Ball Dissection, your one-stop shop for all Dragon Ball wait a second. Roll that back. Part 14, is that what that said? Wow, sure is. It's never taken me this many episodes to get through an arc before. We've officially broken the record! Again. When the Frieza arc took the record 2 years ago, it blew through the previous record by 5 whole episodes. Wonder how far past the record this will get, because, as you may have guessed, we're certainly not finishing up in this episode. Anyway, on with the show! Our story today opens on a sight for sore eyes: relaxation. Depending on how you want to define it, this might be the first time we've seen the characters relaxing in the manga since... well, let's see here. I honestly think it's the first time since the half the characters' invitations got lost in the mail Kame House reunion right before Raditz shows up, which, in real time, was in the neighborhood of about 4 years earlier. You know, unless you want to count that one panel of barbecuing that was already interrupted by the time we saw it. It's good to see picnicking, family bonding, driving through deserted towns, Chi-Chi freaking out about Gohan being a Super Saiyan. Now, this is probably something most of you know, but Chi-Chi's aversion to Super Saiyan, while seemingly tied into her prioritizing of studying over fighting, is actually a reflection of a different cultural idea. Japan is a very homogenized society, both in terms of behavioral expectations and physiology. I'm certainly not saying that all Japanese people look alike, but let's just say animation's tendency to give its characters a wide variety of wild hair colors is not exactly true to life. Dyeing one's hair blonde, especially at the time this came out, was seen as delinquent. So with that context in mind, it's somewhat understandable that Chi-Chi, strict practitioner of the status quo, would think her innocent little son now looks like a punk. Explaining the joke! It always makes things funnier. Despite being able to fly, despite having Kinton, despite being chauffeured around for most of the early parts of the series, apparently Goku learned how to drive at some point. Hey, good for him! I wonder when he managed to do that. And in a perfect world, I wouldn't have to say any more than that. But I know that if I leave it there, I'm gonna have at least one person out there who thinks something is relevant when it's not, and has this compulsive need to remind me. I know you're listening right now, get your hands off the keyboard now! And it's an overrated episode anyway. While they're inexplicably driving, the radio alerts the Son family to the fact that the military is about to launch an assault on Cell. It doesn't end well. But the worst part is that it takes Goku away from his family once again because he realizes that in this kind of situation, they need Dragon Balls. What he apparently doesn't realize is that he promised to fight in Cell's tournament only if Cell promised not to kill anyone in the days leading up to it. I guess there's some kind of loophole for self-defense? If so, that's a very, very broad definition. Of course, that was obviously an empty threat. I mean, what's Goku gonna do? Not fight in the tournament and allow Cell to kill everybody? After confirming with Piccolo that his assimilation of God has indeed deactivated the Dragon Balls, Goku attempts to seek out the Namekians with his teleportation. They really should have left a forwarding address. So instead, Goku teleports to Kaio's world. And hey, it's actually very smart of the series to set up in advance that Goku can, in fact, teleport into the afterlife. Apparently the Namekians didn't leave a forwarding address in Kaio's galactic directory either, because he has to seek them out using his antenna. The interesting thing here is that many people seem to consider the Cell arc to be the most humorless story in Dragon Ball's run, and I suppose it's fair to say that up until now, the laughs have been pretty sparse. Off the top of my head, all I can think of is Goku smacking Chi-Chi through their house, and Chi-Chi smacking Krillin with the door. The artificial human stealing the van is pretty funny. But anyway, it almost seems like Toriyama noticed that because from about this point, the humor in this arc and in the series in general really starts ramping up, starting with this scene of Goku and Kaio. I find these gags to be somewhat underappreciated. That is, I don't think I've ever seen anyone mention them before. I don't think I've ever mentioned them myself, come to think of it. There is the fun double act of each person talking so much as to break the other's concentration until the former snaps at the latter. That's pretty cute. But even before that is one of those jokes that reminds me of how skillful Toriyama is in this medium. And as Goku chastised Kaio for not knowing the situation, then it cuts to a wide two-shot of Goku beginning to explain, with his text bubble ending in ellipses, followed by a close-up panel of Kaio exclaiming, "What?" Only to have Goku remark that he hasn't said anything yet. As a reader, you expect the wide panel to be a literary device to skip past the exposition we already know, when it's actually meant to be taken literally. To me, that's right up there with Goku and Yamcha straight up breaking the fourth wall, and like with that gag, it just doesn't work in animation. Explaining the joke! It always makes things funnier. This sudden shift in tone to more Toriyama-esque humor could actually be related to another staffing change. Kondo Yu had been Toriyama's editor since fairly early in the Saiyan arc, and we've seen his influence in the development of Cell. But around the time Cell achieved perfection, Kondo stepped down and was replaced by Takeda Fuyuto, the third and final editor overseeing Toriyama during Dragon Ball. Given all we've covered so far, the Cell arc appears to be the one story arc in Dragon Ball where all three of his editors were known to play some hand in shaping the story. There is actually very little I know about Takeda's specific influence on the series. However, if Torishima was the strict editor, and Kondo was the increase the popularity editor, Toriyama has described Takeda as a more lenient editor. Since this direction towards more humorous stories continues on through the rest of the series, and it just happens to coincide with this editorial change, I'd wager it's not a coincidence. Anyway, Goku finds New Namek, and like I said in my Movie 6 review, it really does not resemble that story's version of the planet at all. And yada yada yada, it's Dende. Would you really expect it to be anyone else? He's going to come back with Goku and provide them with new Dragon Balls. Not only that, he's going to become the god of the planet. I'm sorry to have to say it, no I'm not, but this is stupid. Not Goku going to find new Dragon Balls, that's all good. Bringing Dende back to do so? Also no complaints from me. Making him god? That's ridiculous and entirely unrelated to the reason they're bringing him there. To be fair, Toriyama has never really gone to the effort of pinpointing what exactly a god's role is in this series, which served as something of a detriment to the arcs where God played a major role. But two things we do know are atypical of the job are being a green slug man and creating Dragon Balls. Those just happen to be the two most defining features of the last guy who held the job, but they have nothing to do with the job itself. It would be like if your boss just happened to be really good at ping pong. It's something you and your fellow employees enjoyed watching him do in your downtime. He'd compete in tournaments, his office was adorned with ping pong trophies. And when he retired and the company had to replace him, they didn't ask the applicants any questions about their management experience or their familiarity with the product you sell. They just hired the best ping pong player. Dende does not have to be God in order to make Dragon Balls. He has no qualifications to be a god, he's just a kid! In fact, I call him perhaps one of the least qualified people possible to hold this job because I would think to be a god of a planet, it would be necessary to actually be from that planet. And yes, the previous guy counts, as does Goku, as they both spent the entirety of their known lives there. Remember how the previous set of tryouts was so rigorous that the last guy had to literally split himself into two people just to be a good enough person to be considered worthy? But this time, oh, you make Dragon Balls? You're God now. It's just such a lazy way to re-establish the status quo. You could do anything with Dende, and you're just gonna stick him up there for no other reason than that fits what we're all used to, and it's the easiest way to give Dende some kind of function. Oh well, I guess that's what the old god deserves for not taking the multiple opportunities he was given to pick a successor. He has no one to blame but himself that this important and sacred right is left in the hands of a person who thought a bride was some kind of food. Anyway, Dende becomes god. He reactivates the Shenlong statue and is going to upgrade him to be able to grant 3 wishes, but then tells them it can only be 2 wishes if they insist on this whole resurrecting large groups of people nonsense. They take the trade, and Goku goes off to find the Dragon Balls. Let's step back for a second. I've been creating Dragon Ball Dissection for 7 years now, and from the beginning, something that has really gotten under a lot of people's skin is how I render this character's name. It is nice to know that over the years I have been vindicated by multiple sources, by official sources, and even by Toriyama himself. But given all the various English translations and interpretations, both official and unofficial, my choices will always make me an outlier to somebody. And it's okay not to agree. It's just something that I as a creator and fan and you as viewers of my content have learned to live with. So on a completely unrelated note, the television announces to the Kamehameha gang that fighting in the Cell games will be the combat sports champion Mr. Satin. Yeah, that's what I'm going with. Because that's how it's written. And spoken. Now, as those of you who've been weirded out by Bluma know, I have no problem gently nudging a name in the right direction if it's limited by Japanese phonemes, but this isn't a case of that. They very clearly have an equivalent of the A sound. It's not a case of a regional dialectical variation to the same sound, and it's not even a case of Toriyama screwing up an English word because what we call Satan is not an English word. It's Hebrew. And in Hebrew it's pronounced, you guessed it, Satan. I can understand that's a big pill to swallow, but be honest. Chances are the first time you saw this character, you were surprised her name wasn't Sailor Uranus. I know it was the first time I was exposed to the pronunciation Uranus, but most likely, like me, you just shrugged and accepted it even if you didn't know why. That's just her name. And this is just his name. Stage name. Since it is a personal name, it can't be wrong by that metric, even if everyone else in the world with that name pronounces it a different way. Now, I'm not saying I would balk at an adaptation that calls him Mr. Satan. In fact, I would expect it to. It's certainly better than the alternatives. As you've seen, for this show, I will adapt the micro band to micro band, translate number-based names so that Ju-Hachigo becomes number 18, and translate the suffix jin into its American personifying equivalent. But after having spent nearly 20 years seeing his name written in unambiguous phonetics, and almost literally hearing nothing except
Mr. Satin? Mr. Satin?
changing that to Satan is just too extreme a change for me to be able to make. That Toriyama introduced Mr. Satin in the same chapter as all of this Goku Kaio banter seems to indicate that he was in a particularly silly mood that week, because Mr. Satin is the most comedic character the series has introduced in quite some time. He also serves as the personification of the idea laid out by the narration last time about the world having forgotten all the disasters of the past. All the crowds cheer him as he explains that Cell's power is all a trick, and that he destroyed the military with preset bombs. Now, I'd like to think that the idea of people forgetting was more of a figurative statement, but it's hard not to believe that Toriyama means it literally. Dragon Ball was away from Earth for a very long time, and it's always felt to me as if, when the characters came home from planet Namek, they came back to a different world entirely. Dragon Ball's world prior to now had always existed according to its own rules. It was a fantasy world infused with futuristic technology. The superhuman feats of the characters were treated as shocking, sure, but never impossible. They were simply the kinds of amazing things you could expect from master martial artists. General Blue in particular had been shocked that these kids could take out as men, but then he saw that they were martial artists, and that mystery was solved, no further questions needed. The idea of people zipping around on magical clouds as a common occurrence was a sight still recent enough to be contained in living memory. The populace was diverse, filled with talking animals, human animals, and sentient monsters. All that seems like a far cry from the world Dragon Ball returns to after the Frieza arc, culminating in this con man managing to so utterly delude the entire population, who've apparently forgotten all of this stuff in a matter of years. It's a fascinatingly cynical take on the Dragon Ball setting, creating the idea of the population rejecting its real heroes while fawning over a fraud. But it's also a much more mundane world, with really only the technology setting it apart from our world. And today, a lot of that technology is looking dated. Even Toriyama's drawing here of the Earth features our real-world land masses. It almost feels like it doesn't make sense anymore for people like Yamcha, Kuririn, Tenshinhan, and Chaozu to even exist here. You have to be some kind of alien to have superhuman strength. And that's probably the genesis of that stupid idea about Tenshinhan having alien ancestry. He and Little Chinese Vampire and Noseless Guy fit perfectly into the crazy original Dragon Ball world, but have a harder time fitting into regular, mundane, average people world. And I get the feeling that Toriyama had spent so much time drawing odd-looking creatures as aliens to fill out Frieza's ranks, that he forgot that he was creating people with similar designs back on Earth. Because aside from established characters, none of whom exist outside of cameos at this point, animal people just don't exist anymore. Of course, I say this in the same chapter the long-ignored Nation King makes a cameo appearance, And funnily enough, he's one of the few non-regulars at this point in the series who actually seems to have the faintest idea what's going on, publicly wishing on TV for someone like the boy who defeated Piccolo to save them. In-universe, I can only assume that while our heroes were on Namek and holed up in the hospital, some apocalyptic event occurred that killed nearly all the animal people, destroyed civilizations, and wiped out records of the past. I'm not saying I truly dislike this world on its own or in regards to the message it presents. It certainly provides interesting story opportunities at various points. And Mr. Satan is such a Dr. Slumpian character, it's amazing that Toriyama took until this late in the series to add him. However, it is such a radical departure, and I unwaveringly prefer the beautiful, wacky, and diverse world Dragon Ball used to inhabit, so its replacement seems extraordinarily tepid by comparison. But maybe that's the reason why these new developments are happening in succession. This new world needs a new god and a new devil. And I suppose this world deserves a god with absolutely no qualifications, someone who exists for no other purpose than to stand around and guard Dragon Balls, while the real heroes do the work. And it deserves a devil who is simply a regular guy with a big mouth and an even bigger ego. However, it's still a world worth saving, so when the day arrives, everyone heads to the Cell games. Now I suppose I have just enough time to complain about one more thing. When Goku arrives at the temple, he is shocked to find everyone looking morose. When asked why, they explain that they found out that while the Dragon Balls can resurrect multiple people, they can't bring back someone who has died once before. This will later be expressed by Gohan worrying that, himself aside, no one but Trunks could come back to life if killed. But remember, the rule is not that people can't be resurrected multiple times. That is simply a consequence of the actual rule. Shenlong cannot grant the same wish more than once. Shenlong has never granted a wish that involved resurrecting Yamcha, or Tenshinhan, or Piccolo. So really, only 3 of these guys going to the Cell games shouldn't be able to be resurrected. Whatever, it's a brand new world now, none of the established lore holds any weight. Next time, Cell begins his tournament and we begin the final act of this oh-so-long story arc. Thank you so much for watching. If you would be so generous, please like, comment, and subscribe. Tell me in the comments how wrong my name pronunciations are, or how wrong I am about Dende being God. Although quite frankly I'd prefer it if you'd say positive things. See you next time!